card.
Is there an agenda? Do we have an agenda?
Yeah. There's
Hard copy.
one over there.
Yeah. And I gave you a
You
hard
should have a
copy, Chris,
hard
of
copy
the,
of everything.
of the packet.
They do have it printed out.
Yeah, I just gave them,
Okay.
and I've got an extra one here.
I guess I'll, since I co-chaired it last year, I'll call the meeting to order of the Finance Committee for March 7th. Would you read the roll, please?
Mr. Jones?
Here.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Here.
And Vice Chairman DeGenova?
Here. Approval of the motion summary, you should have a copy of it. It's kind of short and simple. Move for approval.
Second.
Read the roll, please.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
And Vice Chairman DeGenova?
Yes. Okay, next point of business is election of the chair and a co-chair.
I move to elect Councilman DeGenova as the chair.
Second. Okay. I'll close the nominations and call the roll, I guess.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
And Vice Chair DeGenova?
Yes, I'll accept that role as chair.
And I move to nominate Mr. Jones as vice chair.
Second?
So, I want to, I accept.
Any others? If not seeing any, I move for the nominations to be closed. Read the roll, please.
Okay. Vice Mayor, Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Schaefer?
Yes.
And Chairman DeGenova?
Yes. Okay, Chris, you are my vice chair. I was telling Kent before you came in, I chaired this committee for 22 years and co-chaired it. Mr. Brush wanted to co-chair it for a couple years, so
Now you got 2 more years, so.
if my health lasts.
Yeah, it will.
Item 5 is utility rate review, and that's going to be my duty.
And we are live streaming, Joe.
Okay.
Okay. Tom said he did give everybody a printed copy of the packet, so you have
Yeah,
this,
that helps, yeah.
this spreadsheet. I put it up here on the screen. Can I point at it?
No, we don't have a pointer. That's just a little bit.
I'm going to go to the back there. No, I'm just kidding. What I want to talk a little bit about tonight is our utility rates. We had some discussion during our budget deliberations about potential increase in rates. Nothing significant, but more on the order of inflationary type of increases. What I'm going to walk through tonight a little bit is just projections that I've prepared looking at our water, sewer, and refuse funds, and what a proposed rate increase might mean, and what our cash flow looks like now, and looking out into the future. The first schedule that I had in there, and I think you have a copy of it, is his summary of our utility rates going back to 2003. And what we've done strategically with our rates over the last 6 or 7 years, this just shows that it's broken down by water operations. And then I have 3 lines for water debt in blue. And then following that, we knew we were going to go down a path of expanding and improving our water plant. Prior to 2007, we were pretty confident with capacity fees that we were taking in. So at least the capacity fee portion of the expansion would be covered by capacity fees. What represented fixing what was there would have been a cost that would have been passed on to all of our ratepayers. The sewer plant improvement, the majority of that cost was capacity related. With the water plant, 70% of our total, roughly $30 million cost was maintenance related. We basically had to rebuild what we had there, and we were able to add 1.5 million gallons of additional capacity. So roughly 70% of that improvement was maintenance related. We ultimately, with the downturn in housing, we weren't generating as much capacity fees. I think that was all discussed and presented to City Council. So we went through a series of rate increases to get to the point where we're going to be able to service the money we borrowed to improve both the water and the wastewater plant. And that started in 2007, and those are the three lines, the water in blue and the sewer in brown, that reflected each about it was 8 or 9% increase in total, but it represented about anywhere from a 12 to a 15% increase, 3 years in the water fund and 3 years in the sewer fund. And at the bottom of the schedule here, you can see what the percentage increase is year over year. And if you go back to 2003, the row there in green, we didn't have any increase, and then it was 3%, 3.25, 2.33, and then for 6 years in a row, it's 8, 9.6, 9.26. I was absorbing all those rate increases to help service that debt. Since then, once we got the last one in place in 2012, we haven't changed our rates. So you can see there's 0, 0, and 0 for 2013, 14, and 15. And then what's presented here, this is what we'll discuss a little bit when I kind of walk through this, is what we want to do for 2016 with rates. The numbers that I have there are kind of what I kind of built into the budget document, and I'll kind of walk through that with the next couple spreadsheets that I'll show you. All right, let's see here. Start with the water fund. I'm going to pull up a document which should be in your packet. At the top it says water fund operation projected future cash flows. And what I've done with our water and sewer fund, I've looked at what I would consider to be operation or maintenance cost of our existing system, and I had a separate analysis for capacity related issues. The capacity fees that we do take, we can only use for expansion of our system. We can't use those to maintain our system. So let's aggregate the two. And under our water fund, I've got 4 years worth of historical cost and revenues, 2012, 13, 14, and 15. And then I've got 2016 is estimated, which pretty much represents the 2016 budget, and then some projections moving out through 2020. Under operations at the top, I have revenues, and I've broken our meter charges into two categories. One is what we need to maintain our system, what I would call operations. And then the second line item is the proportion of meter charges that I'm kind of allocating to what I call debt surcharge, was those 3-year increases to help us service our debt. I have a total for total meter charges. So this is what we collect in a year. For 2015 for the water fund is $5.1 million. There is some other income, investment income. We have surcharges and some other revenue sources. But the total revenue in 2015 for our water fund was $5,336,435. From an expense standpoint, I've broken it down by the treatment plant cost. Distribution is the water underground crews that take care of the water lines. And then the administrative transfers, part of that is Brad's cost and the administrative water and sewer gets split between water and sewer. And also we have transfers coming back into the general fund for overhead costs, pay for our audit costs, pay for my time, pay for payroll costs. The utility billing office is actually paid for out of the general fund and then reimbursed by the water and sewer through these transfers. So after those operating costs, and I have a line there for available debt service and capital, which basically means on an annual basis what we're able to have available to pay our debt service cost, and the difference between that number and that the total available is what we could utilize for improvements or maintenance projects. Again, the historical information shows under debt service, This is the amount, the $1,312,000 that's under the across the line plan improvements is the debt service cost for the water plant improvements, the 70% that was related to maintenance costs. And then under capacity fund, I'm just showing what would be a surcharge amount. And historically, you can see there's an amount there, but moving forward over the next 5 years, our housing did pick up a little bit, so it helps. There's less of a need to surcharge that, but we also have that fairly large water capacity fund reserve balance. And so I'm going to draw that down slightly, and I'll explain that here in a little bit. So I subtract.
Real quick, going back up on investment income, what the surcharges of where's that come from?
It's easier to explain, I think, in the sewer fund. This is the water fund, but in the sewer fund, we have certain industries get surcharged, and because of the effluent that we monitor that on an ongoing basis. I remember the old one. It's Henkel now. It used to be Alpha Adochem, but they would get actually surcharged. There's also fees we charge at our wastewater plant if for the private haulers that empty porta-johns or septic systems. They can come and dump that at our facility. When we actually financed the project, we went through OWDA and we got a rate reduction because we agreed to be a septic receiving station, and we can also charge them money for that. So it's revenues like that come in that aren't not meter fees that our residents pay.
I have a question, Dean, on you have an increase up here, 16, 17, 18, 3%, 3%, and 4%. How did you come up with, a percentage of your expenses?
Well,
taking a percentage versus what you did up there? Or?
You mean the numbers in green?
Yeah.
Well, those are what I'm kind of looking at, because that's what this is trying to do, is trying to look into the future and solely looking at it from the standpoint of what our current expenditures are and what they're budgeted for 2016. And I did inflate our treatment cost. At the top, I have a note, our annual cost, I used a 3% increase each year. And then on the revenue side, I did use a 1% growth factor. Even if we don't change the rates with our growth, we're going to collect more in revenue. And so I kind of used those to predict what our operational cost would be. I mean, I don't know what they're going to be, but I just used that as a means, pretty straightforward. I know what our debt service will be, and I used our capital improvement plan, our 5-year plan, as proposed projects. So then what this analysis intended to do is to look at that and say, okay, do we have enough money to do all that? What may be some of the issues, and plug back in there that we're probably going to need, those at least increases on those on that magnitude, and you'll see what it does at the bottom to our reserve balances, and I think I'll be able to show you how I came up with those numbers. Okay. The key there is what I just walked through. We've got our meter charge revenue coming in, and we've got our operational costs to the operators at the plant, the underground guys, and all those costs that every year we're going to incur the same amount. It's not for capital projects that we have a little bit of discretion what and when we do that. And that number, it's on line 22 here. It's the one that I kind of want to keep that where it needs to be over time, because our debt service, if I look out here in the out years, debt service is $1.3 million a year. If I'm not generating at least that out of our revenues less our operational costs, I'm underfunding it, and ultimately it'll draw all of our fund reserves down. But the difference between the two numbers is what we have available to perhaps do water maintenance projects, and so that's an important aspect of this too. We've had some pretty good. Our reserve balances have been fairly substantial, and that's helped us deal with some of the cash flow issues. But as you see the columns coming down, after I take into consideration the maintenance debt, and then what otherwise might be allocated towards our capacity debt, which in the out years I'm not showing any. Available, line 31 there, available for CIP is 300, 400, 494, 326. Do you all see that?
Mhm.
And again, that kind of puts us back into a point where that's what our 5-year CIP is calling for. Without those increases, you'd see more like what you see in 2016, where it's a negative number. We're spending more than we're taking in. And ultimately, we've got some reserve balances, but ultimately 5, 6, 7 years out, we're not going to have any reserve balances to cover that. So I need to keep that in equilibrium. Now, whether the level of maintenance improvements that we're performing are adequate or not, I can't comment to that. That would be a Brad issue. I think it's one of those things we need to interject into our CIP processes to say, I know in the water fund, you might see a list of projects over a 5-year period, which is great, but what does that mean? Are we falling behind? Are we fixing water lines before they break? Are we being too aggressive? I'm not saying we are, but that's the sense we need to have a feel for, that we're at that right point where we need to be to adequately take care of our water lines. And if our capital plan as it exists is in that situation, then this is what it's going to take to fund that and to stay on top of our debt service and everything else. Now, you look at those numbers and it says 3% this year, 3% next year, 4% in 2018, a little bit higher than inflation. We did take, and I don't know if you recall, our electric costs at our new water plant ended up being, not because the rates increased for the electricity, but the actual consumption of electricity when the engineers designed that plant, and then it got built and we started operating, our actual electric consumption was quite a bit higher than what they had predicted. And so we had a big hit, if you recall, this year. Even we did supplementals with our water fund to electric costs. So that's kind of spiked up, and that's taken into account in 2015 and 2016. You can see the treatment plant. 2015, we went from in 2014 is 1,382,000, 1,770,000. You see that? Our annual cost of treatment for the treatment section. In year 2014, we had a big jump. I mean, we had been pretty consistent here, not really having a lot of cost increase. But we jumped up from 2014 to almost $400,000, and a lot of that was attributable to that electric increase. So again, we need to be able to get that built back into our cost, and again, spreading it out over 3 years or so looks at least at this point in time, that we probably can do it with a couple of moderate increases. At the bottom, again, I'm showing the amount that we allocate on line 33 to our CIP, and it's slightly different than what we have available, and so it creates some negative, operation cash flow numbers. Some of that's based on some projects getting carried over from one year to the next, so I have to look a little bit further out than just 5 years. I'm not as concerned about that. The key there is that those fund balances from the various funds that we have in our water operation. We have a water fund operation reserve. We have a water maintenance CIP reserve, water utility reserve, and then a total reserve balance. Those numbers, and if you see the total, you can see it's kind of gone down. And if this holds true out in 2020, we'll have the fund balance down to 3.5 million. When you throw in the capacity fee fund balance there, it gives a total a reserve balance of 6 million. Still in a pretty safe mode, but we need to monitor the impact, our operating costs, and I'll keep, I update this and review this on an ongoing basis, and based solely on this and what it looks like and what our capital plan looks like. That's why I was recommending in our budget process that we really can't go another 3 years with not, if we do, we probably have to bump it up 6, 7, 8% in a given year. And this way it keeps it somewhat more moderate.
How come in 16 we had a deficit 672? Was that because of the electric or?
Well, right.
Cash flow?
We had that big jump. And I'm still allocating some money, $274,000 to the capacity surcharge. By not doing that over the next 4 years, you'll see the capacity fee balance goes down from 4.6 million to 2.4, but I needed to get that back to a point that was probably higher than it needed to be. And again, trying to minimize any rate increases along the way.
Okay.
One of the other things that I incorporated into the 2012 or 16 budget is, if you look at the three funds there towards the bottom, the reserve, we have water fund operations. The water maintenance CIP is just our maintenance capital improvement plan. And there's a third one called water utility reserve fund. Those funds were set up 20 some years ago when we were issuing revenue bonds, which is basically a mortgage type of bond where the bondholders that buy that, you can get a little bit lower interest rate, but you have bond covenants that say you will charge a certain rate to make sure that the bondholders get paid back. Plus, they require you to set up these reserve funds in case you have some catastrophic maintenance failure at your plant. You're not going to have to shut down and thus not have revenue coming in to pay your debt. We haven't issued any revenue bonds. Technically, our water plant, our water and our sewer plant are OWDA loans, and technically they're revenue bonds, but they don't have the same covenants because we went through OWDA, the EPA, to get those. But what I'm going to do is I'm proposing, and what will happen with just the cash flow issues, I want to get that water utility reserve fund up to a $2 million level. It wasn't that far away in water, but the sewer utility reserve was only 187. So one of the things, I'm going to be shifting some money into that sewer utility reserve. And as we move forward with our capital planning, try to get those fund balances in our capacity fee fund and our maintenance fund, to basically say that that's we need to look at as far as the projects we do, and not have these balances that are floating all over the place. And we'll keep that $2 million back as an adequate reserve. That should, if we have any issues that come up, we should be in a pretty good position. It's hard to explain now, but I think it'll make it a little bit easier for the departments to understand some of these cash flow issues when we look at capital planning. One of those keys is I've got to make sure Brad or whoever is working on our utility project list and our capital plan, they understand what flexibility we have. It's one thing to look at maintaining our system and knowing what level of service we need to maintain. When we replace broken water lines, do we replace the water line or we patch it? And then the other side of that is capacity improvements, because I'll talk here quickly about our water capacity fee fund, and what flexibility we have to build new water and sewer lines. That comes into play when we have new development that might be presenting opportunities, whether it be businesses coming to town or even some of the residential development. The next summary with water is actually a water capacity fee fund, and I'm spending a little bit of time with this. I want to take as much time with the sewer fund because it's the same concept. We have operational costs, we have sewer capacity issues. But from a capacity standpoint for the water fund, we take in capacity fees, and the other is just bond proceeds when we were improving the plant. But if you look at, let's say in 2018, I'm projecting up at the top that we're going to collect about $1.2 million in capacity fees. Now, what's that based on? Well, we were at 1.139 million last year. A lot of it comes from residential houses. The year before, we had a little bit of a surge up to almost 1.4 million. You can see in 2012, it was 992,000. If I go back a couple years, it was as low as 600,000. So that number changing that dramatically, it's kind of hard to predict. Again, all I can hope we sustain a level of residential development similar to last year. But if that changes dramatically, then that changes more of that money coming from our meter charges would have to go into this fund to help service debt. So I've got those revenues listed at the top, and then I have existing capacity related debt. And on the water fund side, it's not as high. Sewer fund, a lot of our debt is capacity debt. So you subtract the debt service each year, and particularly looking in the out years, and then there's a line available for capacity CIP projects. So that's what's generated available. You look out there, 18, 19, 2020, about $195,000 a year annually that we're able to utilize for capacity improvements. Well, that's not a whole lot in the bigger scheme of things. If you look at our capacity improvements that are in our capital plan, they're much higher than that. And so the effect of that is that fund balance in our capacity fee funds going from $4.6 million, or $4.783 million at the end of 2015 down to $2.4 million in 2020. Okay, so we could go a few more years, but you can see, there at some point, we really have to be strategic in how we use our capacity dollars. And, there's still some flexibility to do some bigger projects, but ultimately, if we're only bringing in $1 million or so a year, it's barely enough to cover our debt. And it's not freeing up any additional capacity to deal with new projects. So that's an important issue. It's something we've got to get our hands around, and it needs to help drive strategically when we do or don't. If some developer wants to come and plant 300 houses somewhere and want us to extend a water line for $2 million to get it to the land that he's got, we need to seriously think about what that means, because that could easily tap into a good portion of what flexibility we have to build it, and they'll come.
Versus an economic development project where it might be more.
Versus,
An economic development project where there might be opportunities. I mean,
well,
obviously,
strategically, you might want to save some of this flexibility for that.
right.
Because that becomes somewhat of a challenge. Normally, the businesses don't like to pay, they want incentives. We have to be careful with our water and sewer utilities because they are utilities under the state law, and we can't just have some people pay fees and others not. We have to be consistent. But, we've got a limit, we've got a little bit of flexibility. We can still entertain some of that. But again, we need to be very, very strategic.
Well, probably one on that would be like Merrick Parkway, when we want to extend water line over there. We talked about that and how costly that would be.
On which? On
Merrick Parkway,
Merrick Parkway.
yeah, because there's no water line going over there to service that.
That's the water fund. I'm going to pull up here real quick. Sewer fund, and again, I won't spend as much. It's the same concept. Under operations, I'll just kind of look at the totals. Let's see if I can pull this down.
I see here now you have it every other year, 3%.
Yeah, kind of spreading that out a little bit. And if you really look at 3% over 2 years, that's probably an inflation adjustment. So bottom line is it's just trying to keep us in line with what our costs and what they're doing. Absent that, we wait another 4 or 5 years, and then we need a 13% increase. And that's kind of one of those tastes great, less filling things over the years. Some people say, I don't want to have an increase, even if it's small every year. I'd rather wait 5 or 6 and then take a big one. And then we get the people complaining, why do you, how can your cost be going up that much? But so what that means, though, is I think, kind of looking at some inflationary rate increases, we should be okay with our sewer fund, assuming, again, we build as many houses that we don't have, the amount of houses we put in the ground, it doesn't drop in half. Because if that happens, then again, more of this meter money has to go to help support our capacity debt. About halfway down the number, once you subtract the operating cost available for debt service and capital, I'll pick on 2018. It's $3 million, a little over $3 million. Our maintenance debt isn't a whole lot in our sewer fund, $152,000, but that capacity debt surcharge is $2,099,000. And you'll see when I pull up the next worksheet that our capacity debt is much higher than what we're bringing in the capacity fee revenue. So, and then that's why we raised our water rates to help support that. And it looks like that'll still be a little more than $2 million a year. So then the difference between that is the number in green, what's available to do sewer fixes, whether they be at the plant or whether it be with sewer lines. You can see that's right about $700,000-800,000 a year. It's probably at a pretty good level. The allocation kind of bumps up depending on the size of various projects, but I think we're at a point now, again, like the water fund, I can't comment to whether we're doing enough water line and water plant maintenance. There's no indications from Brad that we're holding back or anything like that. So I think we're probably in a pretty good position from that standpoint. At the bottom, you'll see the reserve balances. They do show us dropping a little bit over the next 5 years, but historically, if I'd have gone back 5 years, I would have predicted our balances going down. Usually we're a little better off with actual results. I'm going to the capacity side with the sewer fund. And because you can see here a little bit, if I look at 2016, capacity fees, $1.15 million. We are getting ERU charges for the Southeast Highland Sewer, about $320,000 a year. And then I have an amount representing meter charges. Now for 2016, it's only $681,000 because the difference between that $2 million and this is what I'm putting into that sewer reserve fund I mentioned before to get it fully funded up to $2 million. But as far as projecting out, if I look at year 2018, we have $3.47 million in revenue, of which $2 million of it roughly is from our meter charges. And our capacity debt is, total capacity debt service is $3,064,000. So that leaves a difference of about $400,000 a year available for capacity projects moving forward. Is that adequate? Well, if we're going to put in an $8 or $9 million sewer line to open up an industrial area, you can see that's gonna have a pinch on that. But so, any questions about that?
No.
Bottom line from the sewer fund, I think we're not in a bad spot, at least from our cost and revenues. I would recommend as we move forward, probably some inflationary increases. I don't see anything, at least it's jumping out at me here, that says, we're going down to tubes or or whatever else. On the water fund, we do need to bump them up a little bit more than inflation over a 2 or 3 year period here to kind of adjust for that, particularly that electric cost charge. That's really a big number when you look at our total budget.
Maybe if you just take a look at the average bill for residential customers, it's about $34.84 a month for water and about $46.56 for sewer is really what the average,
And if we did implement, again, whether it's this year or if we waited, I might have to bump it up a little bit next year, or when we do it with what was kind of proposed in the budget. That doesn't mean we have to do that. Roughly a 3% water and sewer and refuse rate amounts to a monthly increase of about $2.85 for the average, I'd say a little bit above average customer. Total. Right, not each utility, that's total.
I mean, really what we were very deliberate in not having the increases over the last several years, recognizing that we had a series of increases to enable us to fund the water plant expansion. What we really didn't anticipate is the increase in that electric cost and that.
What's generating that?
Just all of the equipment, Chris, is just much more energy intensive in terms of the pumps and the processes are, it's just more.
What do you know what that percentage increase was?
Yeah, it was in my budget message. I wish I had my budget message. It was a pretty large increase. It was like the increase in power increase, electric.
Oh, yeah, it was. It was several hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
That's $40,000.
I mean, that alone, and just because you have those membranes and everything that your pumps and.
Just out of curiosity, you can't fix it now, but we buy like the most energy efficient.
Oh yeah, it was in terms of the
It was state of the art.
equipment and everything, Chris. It's just the cost of that type of a plant requires more power.
Is there any chance of it coming down now?
Well, I think what we were going to
maybe a new it's just now being fired up and.
Well, what we were going to try to do is, obviously, it went online last year, so we have not had a whole cycle.
Right.
And I think this year, we were going to actually evaluate I mean, we know it's going up, but we still don't know how much of it is due to, how much of that can be tweaked and reduced, but,
We go through AEP on all that, the power.
well, it's not AEP, we buy our power through a broker. But it comes, we're paying AEP,
AEP
the
for it.
distribution and the transmission, but the actual power is brokered separately. And that power agreement's coming up, and we're evaluating that as well in terms of what
Okay.
the kilowatt charge is.
Mhm.
Yeah, this is it, Dean?
It says in here, it says before we went online with the new plan, it was about 14,565 a month. Afterwards, it's 36,515, so about 22,000 a month, or 250,
And
260.
you just can't, and that's, now, we went from, just kind of the analogies from from analog to digital in terms of what we're doing up there. I mean, it's a very, very good process. It's giving us a higher quality treated water, but obviously it's.
One of the things we didn't know when we sat down with the engineers before we decided what process to put in up there and to use the membranes was that our electric cost was going to go up, but arguably they're saying your chemical cost should go down. You shouldn't have to put as much chemicals into the process. Now that side of the equation, whether we'll be able to get a handle on our electric consumption, find a way to do it more efficiently, but what the effect of
That's my
reduced
thought, too.
chemicals will be, I don't think we've quite got our hands around that. So,
Being
When it's all-
said, you ought to think you'd find savings
right.
someplace else.
So
Whether it's the full amount,
Right.
that could help, and we'll see how that plays out. But right now, just based on where we're at, that's why I said I don't want to go jump out there and do a 6, 7, 8% increase to cover that. We'll spread it out, and if we analyze that again next year, and it seems we've had some cost reductions, we'll visit that.
On the same token, with our operating costs going up 30-some% a year, we can't wait too long to do something.
Right.
Dig a hole for ourselves.
Right.
I'll take that fund off real quick. So what you're saying, Dean, if we have an increase of the water and sewer rates, it would be $285 per household a month.
Right. Roughly in that neighborhood.
Okay.
water.
And that's
sewer
based on
elections.
this 800 cubic feet assumption.
The average
which is
customer.
Like, wow.
That doesn't.
You're saying that is that 285
Yes.
for every household, or is that an average based on?
That's based on what might be labeled the average
Okay,
customer.
that's fine.
I have my daughter's still living at home. She takes a lot of showers. Me and my wife. My monthly about $82. This average is 103, so I'm arguably below the average. I don't know what's yours. You got boys at home though.
Is
too.
it?
I have
Kids.
like 130.
She has $130 a month, so she's
There's 6 of us,
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
How much
Yeah.
is yours?
about 130. I do 2 loads of laundry a day. Is this thing on?
Yeah, you're on TV.
So
too.
that it's probably a little higher than average. It's hard to get an average. That's when we compare rates to other areas in the city or in the state. They usually use that 800 cubic feet. So that's kind of what I've stuck with over time.
Mhm.
If somebody's paying, a senior citizen living alone paying the minimum charge, that it might be $1.50 a year, $1.25.
Do we need to make a recommendation today to take this to council?
Yeah, after he's finished with it all,
Right.
and then I want to, you're going to talk any on the refuse?
Right. I wanted to pull up refuse.
And I want to talk on, and I mentioned it to Tom and Dean on the store utility for curbs and gutters, to increase that 50 cents.
From the refuse fund, again, I've done the same analysis. I don't have to worry about capacity fees and things like that because it's all a little bit more straightforward. Basically, we have to pay for our equipment and our staff to go pick up the trash and get rid of it. Now, the cost to get rid of it sometimes could be a wild card. Several years ago, we put it in our landfill, and we've got obligations. I think you've seen some of that over the years of landfill closure issues. We're actually undertaking a pretty expensive project at the Curve Road landfill to put in a sewer line to take the leachate that's being generated and pump it back to our sewer plant. But other than that, our operating is pretty predictable. Eventually, we get to the point with the growth where we've got to add capacity. If we're running 3 residential trucks a day, you get to a point where if you add enough new houses, you're going to need a 4th. And I think what Bill had mentioned in a couple emails to me is he's getting close to that point. I haven't spent a lot of time, we really talked much about it, but we'll have to look down the road of when we might add that additional person and an additional truck. Hopefully we can do it in such a way, if you run a factory and you can produce 1,000 widgets a year capacity, and you double your plant size, now you're going to have more than what you're selling. You're going to have excess capacity. Well, that kind of is the same to us, but we're able to at least keep the people busy. Sometimes we may split them between refuse and streets to make sure that we can deal with that jump up in capacity. This is based on just increasing 3% out into the future. And again, we've got the basic operating, recycling, collection, same thing, administrative and transfers. Our vehicle purchases, now this reflects what we're actually purchasing, at least what's in our capital plan. Then I have a line there in the middle of the page for building improvements. 2016, it's at 810,000. Well, that may change a little bit based on some discussion that still needs to be had. It was based on some work that was done a year or two ago with the concept of moving our refuse operation down to the facility on East William Street. They did tear down one of the old recycling building on Cherry Street, and then we still have that other pole building out there that we're doing a lot of our recyclables through. So we hope to shift that down and build a building down at the East William Street Public Works facility. And initially we were looking at a building similar to the salt storage building that had one of those canvas or whatever roofs. Bill's looking at a couple other issues related to that, so that might be a little bit higher. We'll have to see how that plays out. But again, that cost doesn't occur every year, and even whatever we build, we'll pay cash for it, and it'll future. The other kind of thing that can be a little bit of a wild card, towards the bottom I have our landfill cost. We have even if nothing's happening, we've got to test and monitor for quite some time our landfills, and so there's some money in there. And then if there are any issues, we've got to do some remediation. And as you can see, we've done a little bit of that over the last 4 or 5 years, has pushed those costs up. Second to the last line item there, third to the last, has cash flow. Again, it's a big negative number in 2016, obviously, because we're putting $810,000 into a building. So that's not necessarily a concern. Moving forward, we're in pretty good shape. So, again, I think from a refuse rate standpoint, what's proposed, I have 2% as part of the 2016 budget, which is what we plugged in there. But there may be a slight increase over the next 3 or 4 years along with that. But again, we're in pretty good shape from a cash flow standpoint, and I don't anticipate any major rate increases looming out there.
On the remediation, I noticed you don't have anything in 17 on. Wasn't it, we had to do that like for 50 or 60 or 100 years? Monitor that?
Not quite that long. The Curve Road facility, because it was closed in the late 80s. The Cherry Street site, since it was closed, I think in the mid-70s, it's...
Should be running out of time?
Yeah, but I don't know. At some point, they'll revisit that. They're going to want to probably monitor it forever, especially with it being right beside the scenic river there. What's going on. There's generally 2 issues. There's groundwater that gets down into the landfill, and when that seeps out, there's either a breakout or potentially it can go into the river. So you have issues with groundwater quality. And then you have methane gas that's generated. And we do have several vents down there that that plant does generate.
That, yeah.
We monitor that level. The wastewater plant generates methane too as a byproduct. But, and if you go down south of Columbus, you see the Columbus wastewater treatment plant with a big burning, I don't think we're going to be at that point. That's always a little bit of a concern when you see burning off all that methane. But we do have to monitor and constantly make sure. That's more of a safety issue than anything else, because especially with having buildings around there. Potentially we have that. I think you recall a couple of yeyears ago with Ron Sabatino with that development close to Curve Road, just across the tracks. We had some issues going through. We knew that was within the 1,000-foot buffer around a landfill, closed landfill that you have to monitor for methane. You also may recall the old campground there. We had to actually buy that property. It cost us $800,000 because there was some methane that was migrating over into that facility. So more than likely, we'll be monitoring the methane for a long, long time. If the groundwater testing that we do after a period of time comes back and there's no real concerns year after year, eventually we probably could
Eliminated.
get away from that a little bit.
Okay.
But I don't know, I don't think there's anything out there from a remediation standpoint. We're not under any court order, at least as we know now. And hopefully this $400,000 project at the Curve Road facility, capturing that leachate. In the past, we did a project 10, 12 years ago where we put in a pit, put a perforated tile around the perimeter of the landfill, and collected that leachate and brought it to a pit, and then eventually we pumped out. Well, again, initially we thought it might be once a month. We had to, what was the point? It was twice a day. That
So
much
this is-
groundwater is getting in. It's not so much that there's problems with the stuff. It's just that there's that much groundwater getting in, and so to kind of look at a more cost-effective means of dealing with that, we actually connected that perimeter collection
To an
system
actual
to a sewer line, and we're going to pump it down to the plant. So we're not going to go out there a couple times a day to empty that.
Okay.
The other issue with the refuse fund, and Bill Farino has been working on looking, it's one thing to say, here's the rates we need to cover our costs. The other element is how we allocate those to residential customers and what we call dumpster customers, which most of them are residential. There are a couple businesses that do, I think 50 or so that do use our dumpster services. The businesses aren't required to use ours. They can use Rumpke or anybody else. The apartment complexes and the large residential units like Wesleyan, they are by our ordinances are required to use our service. And so we have to find a way to allocate our costs based on where the costs are, our rates based on where the costs are coming from. And I used to work with Tim quite a bit. He'd provide me some of the background data and information as far as, number of man hours on commercial versus this. And I had a calculation I would go through to make sure that our, the difference between what our refuse residential customers are generating, what the commercial is close to what their impacts are on the system. Bill's tweaked that, or at least he's revisited that. I think he spent quite a bit of time. I think it's good that he does that, so he gets a pretty good sense for where his costs are coming from and how they fit into the overall rate structure. I don't think there's anything earth-shattering about what he's come up with. It may shift a little bit some of the more of the cost towards the residential side versus the dumpster side, but from what I saw initially, I don't think it was a huge change. So.
One of the questions that's come up is apartment owners have approached, we've had one apartment owner approach us about the cost of their service versus what it would cost if they had a private hauler. And obviously, the private hauler doesn't have the same cost as we do. We treat the...
You know what the difference is roughly between private and us?
I always try to get those numbers, and sometimes it's one thing for us to go out and do a bid, which doesn't always give you good information. But if you look at what, to go out and get business and say, what are you paying and whatever. But so I don't know that we have. I know we tried to ask Bill to see if we can find out from some places to make an apples to apples comparison.
One of the policy issues is that residential, we treat the apartments as residential. I mean, they don't get toters, obviously, but they're part of our residential system. If you allow them to opt out and go to the private hauler, you're now setting up a situation where you've got kind of this uneven situation where you've got private haulers coming into the city. They're picking up the apartments are residential. Well, I'm a residential customer. I just live in a single family house. Why can't I have my trash picked up by ABC hauling service? So that's some of what's at play.
But businesses can use private.
Businesses do, yes. And in some,
Do we know what percentage of businesses in Delaware use private compared to
Us.
I don't know what the percentage don't. What Bill said is that we have of our, of our dumpster service, current monthly billing, it's been dumpster service somewhere. You had that noted on here.
right.
We have 303 dumpster units out there. Some of them get picked up more than once a week. And he says 228 of them are for multifamily. 18 of them are cities. So there's 57 non-residential businesses that do use our dumpster service. How many we have?
And so of that 57, that's just commercial, that's not apartment complexes.
No, 228 of them are
Okay,
residential
okay,
apartment
okay.
complexes. There are some policy issues associated with that in a lot of different areas. I know several years ago, there was concern if you're going to operate a refuse utility, it'd be difficult for us to go up and down every year based on how many customers you have. I think that's one of the reasons why they latched onto the residential units. Logic being too, the only reason it was any different is because you couldn't get in front of everybody's apartment. So we'll put you, in the same boat that the other residents are in the city. Businesses had a little bit easier for them to deal with getting their own service. One of the problems, though, even with what we do now with the businesses that are going private, you saw some of those landfill closure costs. The reality of it is a lot of that was from stuff put in our landfills that we own years ago by the businesses. And those that don't use our service aren't paying for any of that. And it'd be very difficult to do that. You perhaps could find a way that we could get some legal opinion to say that we can we can create some sort of a, almost like what they do at the transfer station countywide, where they say they charge the district fees and different things like that. And everybody has to pay them, whether the city or the private haulers. So if we look at that down the road, now we've looked at privatizing our whole system. We've done that at least 2 times in the 25 years I've worked here.
Twice since I've been on council. So.
We went out and looked at some,
What?
some proposals.
Yeah.
Privatizing, we looked at it a couple years ago.
I mean, the thing is, if we're going to be in the business, and we want to be as efficient as we can. And that's why we went to the single person.
That's why we're trying to go with, I think, we're going to get into business and we need to figure out how to capture some more of that commercial,
Oh, you mean the
commercial dumpster, business as opposed to.
and part of that is the equipment. What we lack is we lack the truck that has the,
The front end.
yeah.
Well, again, we could buy the equipment, we have it, but if we do it, we have to be careful that we can create a certain sustainable level. If our sales are going up or down, with the residential, we can pretty much predict how many we need and then people. And because we're a little bit at a disadvantage to the Rumpkes because they have so many more units and so many more people, they can move them around. Where here, it's, we've got a finite amount there. And if we've got excess capacity that we have to carry because we bumped up some customers commercial wise, and then we lost those customers, we're not as adept, so to speak, at laying people off.
People use, just based on price. If
Right.
$8 was $25 a month cheaper, we just, I don't know.
Well, it's worth trying to get
Right.
better information,
Yeah, I
even
agree.
to go to some of the businesses that aren't using our services and see what they're paying.
I don't remember when I did it, but whenever I was at BP, it was one of my projects I had to
Well,
do.
good, you can have this one too. You're retired now, just knock on doors.
Thanks. Chris. You're like my wife, you volunteer me for everything. Anyways, yeah, the private was more economical than what the city's cost.
And I'm forwarding you an email that had circulated from Doug Price a while back when this came up.
Mhm.
That he got a price
Okay.
from a refuse hauling service of what it would cost this apartment complex. And we'll compare that with what we're
And
charging.
again, before we would just go down that path of saying, well, we'll just let them, and we need to look at what that impact is, because at some point, like I said, those landfill costs will be real and they'll be out there continuing. I think we're going to need to, because now, that in and of itself could be whatever, a certain amount of dollars less per month, because the private haulers aren't contributing towards that. So.
Okay. Well, moving on, are we going to be done at 6:30 or 7? 6:30, okay. So we have a half hour. Is that all you have on the refuse?
Other than just, I know Tom had talked about the timing, could we get by and wait another year with doing a rate increase? We could. It just pinches those numbers moving forward. I might have to bump them up a little bit, but
Yeah, that's my concern. The longer you wait, bigger hole.
The deeper you get.
typically what we've done is have gone to council with 3 readings. So, and normally we were into that a little bit sooner than where we are here in March. So Normally, if when we increase the rates, it'd be effective May 1st, but we may have to push that back a month or so.
Okay.
But if you agree, I mean, kind of get your
I'm
feedback.
with Ken, I think it's better to do now.
Now, later.
than get rid of the whole.
Yeah, I think that's the best approach.
Well, one area I had discussion with staff on was the storm sewer utility. And is that a good time to bring it up now, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of our utilities.
It's a utility to be having, it's not in here. We've been charging like $2.50
Since it was put in place.
established
$10.
$2.50 a month.
It's, now that's residential. It's
For
based,
what?
this is for the storm sewer fund. This
Yeah.
guides storm sewer projects, some streets sweeping.
Never had anybody question it or anything. They all pay it, and we've been able to use it. We have a fund balance in there, I know, right now. What brought it up was the curbs and gutters. Curbs and gutters in some of the subdivisions are really gone to pot.
For sure.
And discussing it, if we did a 50% increase from $2.50 to $3,
50 cents, not
50 cents,
50%.
yeah, not 50%, $2.50 to $3, would establish a fund there, which we could also use when the transportation levy. When they go into these subdivisions and they want to do the streets, they'll have a fund available also for square footage as far as and gutters. And we don't have that right now.
You might not cover 100% of those costs, but
No.
it could help offset them. I mean, curbing is expensive when you're replacing it. And oftentimes, when you're replacing it, you're having to put in a whole new,
Whole new
the road, and it's often more involved than you would think, but
So that would be on average then.
About $165,000 would be what that 50-cent increase would generate per year.
we generate about $800,000 a year now.
So you would tack 50 cents under that 285.
Right.
15 cents, that's what's the math.
$3.
310.
It'd be, 335.
Yeah, it's $250 now.
335
So if we
I
did
mean,
all
for the
ones, it's
overall
about 335. Right.
of all water, sewer, and refuse in it.
Right?
With the 285.
You mean the 285 with 50,
285.
Oh, you're doing it that way.
335?
Yeah, I mean, 335 a month up to the 800.
Yeah, and what the idea that Joe has suggested is, could you earmark some of that increase for road curbs and gutters in, certain circumstances when you've got replacing a road, it's a maintenance issue, you've got to pull out the curb. Right now, the replacement of the curb is the property owner's responsibility, technically, just like the sidewalk.
None of
In a lot of communities, curb assessments are placed on a property. Community comes in, they replace the curbs, there's an assessment that goes against the property, now they're paying that assessment over a period of time for the new curb that's part of the street. We haven't done that, but we haven't really been in a position where the time where we've replaced streets and replaced the curbs with them, we've just borne the cost. It's a huge cost, and this was one possible way to look at
How long has
funding
that
some of it.
250 been in place?
Since
It hasn't
day one.
changed
It's
since
been
12 years.
15
12
years,
years.
something like that.
Yeah, we've had the utility in place. That was what we established at the time. It was based on impervious surface and
One of the things related to the curbs is again, we'd have to, I think, what might help to not just look at, well, let's just make it 50 or whatever, is the correlation between our road projects that we would look at doing and the condition of the curbs and whether they have curbs, because that's always been that issue. What about a road out there? There's several of them we have that don't even have curbs.
Mhm.
And I think it's okay using a storm sewer utility to maintain and fix a curb because it's part of the storm sewer system. But if you don't, now you'd have to make an argument that right now the water sheet flowing off the road with no curb going into a ditch, and in lieu of it going into that ditch, we're going somewhere, going nowhere, just standing there. We're going to put curbs in too, because that's a pretty hefty cost. If they don't have curbs, do we also use storm sewer money to install curbs where they're not? And it has a big impact. I know that's why I think Bill needs to really work and talk a little bit about with his engineers, and then perhaps Brad, because a lot of times putting in new curb they got to change the whole profile of the road. It really, because we tried doing that several years ago. It really added to our cost. But again, it might take a long time to do it, but at least you have a dedicated source there to start the process.
Makes sense to me. Yeah.
Okay, after that discussion, then what's the wish of the finance committee as far as moving forward with the utility increase this year?
I move that we recommend to council the increases that Dean has laid out here, and in addition to that, a 50-cent charge for storm sewer.
So do we need a figure 335?
It's a percentage figure. on
Whatever the
sewer, right?
percentage would be.
Right. I think what you recommend to council is that
Increase it.
we present the proposals, and a part of that presentation to council, I'll say what it'll probably be close to 335. It's in my math, but you're looking at about a 3% for water, sewer, refuse, maybe a little less than that. Now, the 50 cent is a specific amount. If that's what you want to be a part of the recommendation. Then we'll make that for the storm sewer. The other thing you might add to that is if it is your intentions that part of that get set aside for
That's the
curb.
question. Is it, do we know it's going to be 50 cents or could it be less? Could it be
Well,
not to exceed 50
It
cents?
could be whatever.
it's certainly not, $160,000 when you replace, 6,000 feet of curb it's not gonna,
So
if anything, it arguably could be more, but I think what you're saying is at least
At least that.
take a look at it.
Is his motion acceptable then?
I think it would be, and I think at the council time, we can clarify in the ordinance that changes it.
Right.
If there's this notion that we clearly want, the 165 or the 50 cent amount to be set aside and only used for curb and gutter improvements, because otherwise it'll become part of a number that,
I think
If
that's
that's what you
the
wanna do.
intent,
Yeah.
is that increase be set aside for replacement of curbs and gutters.
the 250 standing alone, where are we at storm sewer? We're able to do projects on an ongoing basis. We've made a lot of headway in the last 12 years. We do have some operational costs because we go back and fix it. Is the pace, do we have a lot of people? Do you get a lot of complaints from people standing water and storm sewer issues? Probably certainly not what we had 15 years ago. So, allocating that 50 cents specifically to curb and gutter, we really haven't done any of. I don't think it's going to have a negative effect on our other storm sewer maintenance issues.
I second Mr. Schaefer's motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Do you have that?
Do you want me to read what I have?
Yeah.
All right, I have recommend the council to increase the utility rate recommended by the finance director. In addition, a 50-cent increase change to the storm sewer rate. Is that correct?
Correct.
Very good. Read the roll, please.
Vice Mayor Schaefer,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Jones,
Yes.
Chairman DeGenova.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Utility rates then will be brought forward
The next meeting.
next meeting. Okay. Update on the CIP.
Yeah, we are in the process of evaluating how things finished last year and taking a look at projects that may have to make some changes to present a CIP amendment to City Council. We've got a public service group meeting on Wednesday, and that's one of the discussion items. And I know Dean's been monitoring this more carefully, obviously. But really, the other thing I talked to Dean about is starting our capital improvement program process earlier in the year. Doing it in August, this is something that gets back in the charter. It's too compressed between the time that I submit the CIP to you in August and the time that you have to adopt it in October.
Did you just try to?
Yeah, I will when they get to that
Okay.
chapter. They're doing it chapter by chapter. So I spoke to Darren about that today. That's a little off topic, really, just in terms of what we're looking at. But
Okay, but we'll have a report then.
Our CIP review, and what I tried to get our departments to do, we go through a process as it stands now, where in September they submit a 5-year capital plan, and some of them are a little bit better adept at looking 3, 4, 5 years out, and more often than not, it becomes, okay, what's changed? What are we going to do next year? It almost becomes a little bit closer to a 1-year capital plan. But regardless, we submit that in September, it gets submitted to council, kind of gets reviewed. We go through a budget process, and we generally, I take those first year capital plan projects and incorporate them into the budget. And then we get into the first part of the year, and what I like to be able to do before we start getting into bidding some of these projects out, so we need to step back and revisit our numbers, because they're estimates, and we may have better estimates now, or things may have come up that have changed things, and that invariably happens. So I don't want to go back, and rather than just change our budget and do supplementals, we need to look at what the effect of that is on our capital plan. Too often departments will look at it and say, well, in lieu of doing this project, we'll do this one. We're just going to shift it. We'll push this one back a year. Well, if you push it back a year, the next year's money's already accommodated for. You either have to not do it or make a whole changed 5-year plan. And so sometimes its costs are higher. Sometimes there was positive things, like one I would share with you tonight. We got communication from OWDA that the loan actually did for a wastewater treatment plant several years ago. It's about a $26 million loan. They're going to roll the average interest rate back from what was 3.559% down to 3%. It's interest rates, I didn't realize they were ever going to do that, but they did. So that's going to free up almost $100,000 a year of debt service. So I'm going to go in and amend our capital plan because I've got a lower debt service. And
So when you look at the CIP, you got it broken into different areas.
Mhm.
You can always move money from CIP for a park or whatever and move it to
Another project,
Yeah.
not utilities, but.
some degree of, and that's why we break the general fund supported ones. The ones where it's transferred from the general fund, that's discretionary money. We can do whatever you want with that. The utilities has to be utility projects. Impact, municipal impact, fire impact, police, those are limited into what you can use those for. Some of our road monies, gas taxes, license fees, that are shown as part of our capital plan, obviously that can only be spent on road maintenance. So there is a certain degree of flexibility.
Where I'm going with this is just it's something I can't stop thinking about. It's on topic, off topic, but this whole Flint, Michigan stuff, I guarantee you there's going to be a mandate coming down at some point that, you have to look at, your water lines and all this stuff. Something's going to change.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be an increased cost of something. So,
And I think that's a good point. I was going to have Brad actually address that at a future meeting, just in
Yeah,
terms of
okay.
where you address this, but how we're addressing it. But we've actually been pretty good about staying on top of our maintenance in terms of how we do the maintenance and making sure that it's done in a way that we're staying ahead of it.
I'm sure there'll be some sort of
Well, with
national mandate coming out of this.
EPA, yeah, there could be something coming from EPA, I'm not sure where, but Brad attended a workshop a month or so ago at Ohio EPA in light of all of this. So I just actually sent him a text to find out more about that. But
what we can do a good job, we're in pretty good shape with what we can control, our treatment process,
Right.
our underground lines. But when it gets from that water
service line
stop
to
into the house, and people got lead pipes in their houses, may not have anything to do with our water and the
Right.
level we're treating it. It just may be that they've got old lead pipes. We do test.
On a quarterly basis like you're going to do.
At
And-
finance committee level
Yeah.
or whatever. I mean, we do administratively, we're constantly monitoring. I do on an ongoing basis. But what I want to do, and I try to do the first part of the year, is after we've gone through our budget cycle and the departments have updated their estimates, if it has a material effect, if there's no real changes to what we've laid out, then there's no sense in amending your capital plan. Not just amending the budget. My push is to amend your plan. If there are some changes, and we've had a couple of them, then I think we need to look at that back in the context of what that means to our plan. Because just because they did a project and they originally thought it was going to cost $125,000, now it's going to cost $250,000. Well, rather than just changing the budget, we need to assess whether that's still worth doing that project. I'm not saying it wouldn't, but we may look back for $250,000. I don't think it's worth it for the benefit we get. So I want to have that revision and look at it more comprehensively than just saying, well, can you come in here with a supplemental? You're going to see a series of supplementals and saying,
Yeah.
oh, this project went up $122,000. Okay.
I think we
Yes.
should be in that loop,
All right.
this committee.
So what we're going to do is try to quantify that, and we'll go back to city council. Part of it may be changing the plan and associate if there are acts in 2016 to the budget. We'll be able to explain those appropriation changes in the context of what it means to our 5-year plan.
Okay.
And just a couple, I know that Bill was notified by Morpsey that the overheight detection system was an increase in their cost there, and Morpsey has agreed to provide additional funding for that. So that's an example. We'll have to make a change, but it's an increase that just is through
They're absorbing the cost.
non-local dollars.
That'll change our budget, but it won't impact our capital plan because it's not impacting our cash.
But there are a couple of others that Bill has talked about that could. Two that I wanted to mention that are really less CIP, but supplementals that are going to be probably before you Monday night. One is for the parking study. So we put $20,000 in the budget for 2016 for the parking analysis, not knowing exactly whether that was going to be adequate. The interviews were held last 2 weeks ago, and the firm that we've selected, their fee is $40,000. And so, now we didn't.
What you need to know is that all three of the firms that bid were all 60,000 plus, and by negotiating with to get what we really need done. And so I don't think it's an unreasonable. We just didn't know what it was going to cost to get done what we wanted done. Our feeling is we want to get it done right, but by negotiating and being willing for city staff to take on the funds, we were able to get that down.
In that case, it's a classic example.
Yeah.
You know, a placeholder for that.
That's all I really.
That's what it was, Chris, because we didn't really.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah. And the other one was for the building study next door to take a look at evaluating feasibility of remodeling the building next door for both the entrepreneurial center and for our own offices. We know at the end of last year what that cost was going to be. We just finished the RFP process, so it's about $25,000 to actually evaluate, actually get an architect in there, take a look at what the feasibility is. Could you phase it over a period of time? And until we know that, it's hard to give council any idea of. You ask me, well, what is it going to cost to do something with that building? We don't know. So that's the other one that I wanted to mention. So those are probably both due Monday night.
Year-end finance report?
I have a year-end report. I've had it done for a couple of weeks. I just wanted to chat with the finance committee about it a little bit, and I'll send it out to city council. Again, it's a lot of typical things I send out with spreadsheets with a lot of numbers. I'll walk through a couple of them, and if you had any others you wanted to ask some questions about, and this is just a broad looking at a year's worth of activity. First one is on page 5 of the document that I sent you electronically. I've got it pulled up here. This is kind of looking at our budget versus actual. A lot of businesses do that. Broken down primarily by our operating funds, not some of the grant funds and things like that. And you can see, I'm looking at what our original budget was and carryover amounts, and in essence, from what we budgeted in 2015 versus what we actually spent. Now, there's some negative numbers in there, and to comply with the revised code, we did do supplementals to cover those, but there's not a lot of them, but just to give you a little bit of an idea, $720,000 out of the general administration, again, was the additional snow transfer that we did. Trying to think what the other ones were off the top of my head. But those were all anticipated. We knew as the year evolved what that was going to be. Tax refunds, we can't always predict what that'll be. Management, I think we had come to you earlier in the late last year indicating that our property and liability insurance had gone up. Under engineering, that's actually a good one. We were doing a lot more plan reviews, and so we had to supplement our professional services. We did get revenue coming in to offset that, and I think you're aware of some of the issues we had with our city buildings. Outside of that, street division, I think that's again related to our snow plowing. A couple things up at the water treatment plant, electrical related, but by and large, most of them are on the positive side. And again, if you look at it in total, especially the general fund but for that 720, which we knew what the impact of what that was going to be. Typically, I don't see that in a given year. More often than not, there's a lot more positive variances than negatives. So typically why our fund balance tends to go up. Let's see what might else be of interest. Flip to our income tax collections, which again is a primary discretionary, mostly general fund, but also fire EMS and our park improvements. For 2015, came in at about a 6.16% increase on a cash basis. So pretty good, all things considered. I wouldn't mind seeing that continue for several years down the road. I've got a couple graphs and different things in, just looking historically at some of our information, some of our major business-like operations, airport. Again, just trying to give you a little historical information, how things are going out there, our cash flow revenues versus expenditures. A lot of that's driven by our fuel sales. Even though our fuel revenue was down quite a bit, 551,000 to 494, the cost of fuel was a smaller percentage, our larger percentage reduction. So helped our cash flow. Did okay in 2015, and kind of shows where that's at. Let's see. We talked a little bit about the water and sewer funds. Golf course, again, this is just a cash basis. Our revenues coming in, expenditures, and from a cash flow standpoint. I know generally we talk about this every year when we do a budget, because it usually shows a much larger difference between revenues and expenditures, but typically as we go through the year, we adjust our expenditures. And we were slightly $6,880 negative cash flow. The fund balance is still there. You can see it's at 85,000 at the end of 2015. That was 84,000 at the end of 2011. So a couple of years we have where we have some positive and then negative, but all in all, not too bad.
Okay. We can probably, Dean, maybe go into it the next meeting a little more.
Well, we got about 6:30. You can take a look at it, and if you had specific questions, you can email those to me. There's information about our health insurance, about our current debt level, a number of other different things in there. Yeah, feel free to send me an email if you've got some questions.
Okay, item 8 is members' comments.
I have none.
Nothing, thank you.
Ken? Okay. The only comment I have, I thank the committee members having the entrustment of me being the chairperson again. Hopefully anyone can call me at any time and get a hold of me, and if they have any kind of a problem, we'll rectify.
I did have one other comment. I will be reintroducing our note legislation at the next council meeting. If you recall, when we passed that last meeting, we took out what looked to be an error in the document. Heaven forbid, Chris is always right. It actually was supposed to be in there. What we ended up doing was we were changing a previously adopted ordinance from a couple years ago to provide greater flexibility with our future debt service cash flow. I'd requested Chris to do that. So but I looked at the previous paragraph, it would have said, we're also changing a previous ordinance. And that's why I was in quotations and had some items marked out. So it was kind of confusing, but we're okay. I'll reintroduce that again at the next council meeting. We just need to put that back in. So we're going to make you aware of that.
Okay. The next meeting,
Yeah, it really is up
the
to,
substance of our next meeting, our work session, we probably should have one
yeah, you could have one in a few weeks.
couple of weeks.
I can have Michelle try to set something up. I don't know when.
Yeah, I'm out of town from the 16th through the 20th.
Of March or March.
Yeah.
Well, you think April would be too late? Just schedule one for April?
Or the end of the month.
Or end of March.
Early April. I can take a look.
I'm gone the last week of March.
Why don't
Last
we do
week,
then early April?
yeah, March,
Because
last
between
week
the
is
two
a
of you
lot.
guys being, okay.
March has got
Early
spring break and everything coming up. So let's
Okay.
do it early April.
Okay.
Then you can
Well,
let
Yeah,
us
throw
know.
a couple of dates up.
Yep,
Just-
okay.
Yeah, it's gonna do, because I've got some business travel.
Yeah.
In the middle of April too. So
Okay. I know in April, the only time I'm going to be gone is 9th and 10th.
I get some travel in too, so
We
she's
got-
for a couple of days after the.
Okay.
Okay, very good. Motion for adjourn.
So moved.
Second, we're adjourned at 6:25.
Reconvene at 6:30.
You know, it was.
Thank you.